It seemed like Chairman Bernanke had a specific goal in mind in his speech, which was basically to tell people, leave us alone. We can't carry the world on our shoulders.
Well, I think that's right, and he's exactly right. The time for action is now, but that action is really from the government. The Fed's been amazingly accommodative during the crisis. The government has sat on its hands in large measure. And I think what Chairman Bernanke was saying is, well, we need to get our fiscal house in order. He also did, though, say the Fed does have tools to deal with the crisis if it worsens.
Well, he didn't talk about those tools, though, and a lot of people expected him to outline what they might be, as he did in his monetary policy testimony in July. Do you think he didn't because the Fed's divided, because he thinks they won't work, or because he thinks they're not necessary right now?
Well, what he said was, we'll see in September. That's when the committee meets again. He has said before, and he said today, that the Fed has the tools to deal with a worsening downturn. He did refer to joblessness and his concern about that. But really, the Fed's mission is not joblessness. The Fed's mission is low inflation. The Fed's mission is really financial stability. Secondarily, the rest of the economy. The government needs to focus more, and I think that's what the chairman clearly said.
He certainly did land hard on Congress, harder perhaps than you might have expected?
Not really. I think the chairman, like most of us, is frustrated at the theater around the debt ceiling and the lack of attention to the long-term fiscal problem. That definitely constrains monetary policy, and it affects all of what the Fed does. So I think he was right to land the blow.
And he made a specific plea for short-term stimulus. What kind of stimulus do you think would be good for the economy?
Well, I think what he said was we need a long-term framework, and if we have that, we have the room for short-term stimulus. I think what would be good for the economy are down payments on that long-term, corporate tax cuts that would support investment and increase support for workers. Much of what we see in terms of infrastructure projects or just a temporary payroll tax cut, I don't think is going to make the grade.
Well, we've seen in the past efforts to try to adjust the tax code. Can we fiddle with it, or is this the time to do a total overhaul?
We have to do a total overhaul. Anybody who's looked at the tax code knows if you pull one string, pretty soon you're pulling at the whole cloak. And tax reform could add between 0.5% and a full percentage point to growth for a decade every year. We just can't afford not to do it.
Well, Russell Long used to say, don't tax you, don't tax me, tax that fellow behind the tree. Who should be taxed? How should we be taxed? What kind of tax reform do you think would be most efficient?
Well, we need two things in mind. One, we've got to have growth, and the other is broad-based prosperity. And for growth, we need low marginal tax rates. And broad-based prosperity will come from that growth. And so low marginal tax rates, to be possible, are going to have to require cutting back on tax expenditures.
And what does that mean? Translate that into, for the average person, what that means to them.
That means something like the Bowles-Simpson Commission reported out, which would be scaling back further the home mortgage interest deduction, scaling back tax preferences for health insurance. These can be done in a way that are very progressive, that is much of the burden on affluent Americans and not on middle-income Americans.
Interesting. You're a conservative economist. You worked in the Bush administration. Liberals have also embraced Bowles-Simpson, but it doesn't go anywhere. What's the problem in Washington?
Well, the president has not embraced Bowles-Simpson. In fact, he pretended like it didn't exist, even though it was his commission. So with tax reform, one lesson is presidents have to lead. So when this president's ready to lead, we'll have a discussion of tax reform. If he doesn't, it'll just be hearings.
Well, do you think that Republicans are open to tax reform? Moderates able to be open to it, or conservatives open at all to it, given their stance on the taxes in the budget debate?
Well, we have to have a discussion of tax reform, and Republicans have to be open to it. First of all, if we care about growth, we need tax reform. And on the other side, if you actually want to raise taxes, you couldn't really raise taxes much in the current tax system. It's too full of inefficiencies. It would really strangle growth. If you want a government as big as this president seems to want, you'd have to have tax reform anyway. So it depends on which side you're coming from, but the answer is the same, tax reform.
Last question, are you optimistic or pessimistic going forward?
I'm optimistic about the economy's long-term prospects. I do think we're going to see very sluggish growth in the next year, and we needn't. If we had better policy, if we clarified uncertainty, we needn't. But I fear that's what we've got.
You agree with the chairman, we don't have a structural change in the economy?
I do not see that structural change, but I do worry that that period of adjustment is going to be long and joblessness high, unless and until our leaders in Washington focus.
Glenn Hubbard, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Okay.